Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, Context is Everything Media Network founder and CEO John Michael is reading a textbook cover to cover. Today, we start a new chapter. We start a new decade of chapters, actually. Chapter 30. Chapter 30 is the second chapter after World War I ended. And this chapter is called Crisis of Democracy in the West from 1919 to 1939. So it sounds like we're building up context, which is everything, context for World War II. I see Benito Mussolini on the page here. That guy, not good. Let's start. Section 1, Chapter 30, page 746 of 1007. Now, please subscribe. All 58 subscribers, I very much appreciate you. And thank you, even if you don't. But yes. The Western Democracies, Section 1, Chapter 30. Here we go. Setting the scene. The Western Democracies. In 1929, All Quiet on the Western Front, German writer. In the 1929 novel, All Quiet on the Western Front, German writer Erich Maria Remarque captured the disillusionment of the World War I generation. The novel's hero, a young German soldier, endures 3 years of grueling trench warfare. His friends are dead, butchered by bullets, shrapnel, artillery, and poison gas. In the last chapter, he wonders how he could return to civilization after feeling dead inside. Had we returned home in 1916, out of the suffering and the strength of our experience, we might have unleashed a storm. Now, if we go back, we will be weary, broken, burnt out, rootless, without hope. We will not be able to find our way anymore. All Quiet on the Western Front. The catastrophe of World War I shattered the sense of optimism that had grown in the West since the Enlightenment. Despair gripped survivors on both sides as they added up the staggering costs of the war, especially among the democracies. Economic and political crises only added to the growing pessimism of the 1920s and 1930s. Hold on. In these heavy-hearted times, I need to get a new pair of sunglasses because, as is tradition, every new heading, I wear a pair of sunglasses to denote heading. I'll wear sunglasses, so if you're peripherally listening, you can be like, oh, he's talking about something else. He's wearing sunglasses. Let me grab a new pair. Every chapter, a new pair. Thank you for following. Please, again, all 58 of you subscribers, I very much appreciate your patronage. And I would very much appreciate if you would follow, but if you don't, that's okay. That's okay. But please. And thank you. My name is John Michael at the Context is Everything Media Network. And I'm almost done with this book, which has taken me since January 1st. Once I finish it, new programming on the way, which will be original content, not just reading a textbook. Unless somebody mails me a textbook. An old one, particularly, would be great. I'll read that. Okay. Post-war issues, new heading. In 1919, 3 Western democracies, Great Britain, France, and the United States, appeared powerful. They had ruled the Paris Peace Conference and boosted hopes for democracy among the new nations of Eastern Europe. Underlying problems: Beneath the surface, however, post-war Europe faced grave problems. At first, the most pressing issues were finding jobs and returning veterans and rebuilding war-ravaged lands. Many nations also owed huge debts because they had borrowed heavily to pay off the war. In the early post-war years, economic problems fed social unrest and made radical ideas more popular. The Russian Revolution unleashed fears of the spread of communism. Some people saw socialism as the answer to hardships. Others embraced nationalistic political movements. Other troubles clouded the international scene. As you have read, the peace settlements dissatisfied many Europeans, especially in Germany, and among various ethnic groups in Eastern Europe. Finally, Europe lacked strong leaders just when they were most needed. The war had killed many of those who might have helped solve critical problems. The pursuit of peace. During the 1920s, diplomats worked hard for peace. Hopes soared in 1925 when representatives from 7 European nations signed a series of treaties at Locarno, Switzerland. These treaties settled Germany's disputed borders with France, Belgium, and Czechoslovakia, as well as Poland. The Locarno treaties became the symbol of a new era. France and Germany ban war forever, trumpeted the New York Times headline. France and Germany ban war forever, trumpeted the New York Times. The hopeful spirit of Locarno was echoed in the Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1928. Almost every independent nation signed this agreement, promising to renounce war as an instrument of national policy. In this optimistic spirit, the great powers pursued disarmament, the reduction of armed forces and weapons. The United States, Britain, France, Japan, and other nations signed treaties to reduce the size of their navies. However, they failed to agree on limiting the size of their armies. Despite grumblings about the Versailles Treaty, people around the world had great hopes for the League of Nations. From the headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, the League encouraged cooperation and tried to get members to make a commitment to stop aggression. In 1926, after signing the Locarno agreements, Germany joined the League. Later, the Soviet Union was also admitted. Obstacles to peace. Although the Kellogg-Briand Pact outlawed war, there was no way of enforcing the ban. The League of Nations, too, was powerless to stop aggressors. It had also been damaged by the American refusal to join in 1931. American refusal to join the League of Nations. That's not gonna help. In 1931, the League vigorously condemned Japan's invasion of Manchuria, but to no effect. Noting the League's weakness, ambitious dictators re-armied their military forces and pursued aggressive foreign policies, as you will read. Recovery and depression. During the 1920s, Europe made a shaky recovery. Economies returned to peacetime manufacturing and trade. Veterans gradually found jobs. Middle-class families generally enjoyed a rising standard of living, with money to buy new products such as cars, refrigerators, and radios. The United States emerged from the war as the world's leading economic power. American banks and businesses controlled the global network of trade and finance. American loans and investments backed the recovery in Europe. As long as the American economy was healthy, the global economy remained relatively prosperous. A dangerous imbalance. Both the American and world economy had weak spots, however. The one major problem was overproduction. a condition in which production of goods exceeded the demand for them. The war had increased demand for raw materials from Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Improved technology and farming methods also contributed to higher output. After the war, the demand for raw materials dwindled and prices fell. Consumers benefited from the lower prices, but farmers, miners, and other suppliers of raw materials suffered severe hardships. At the same time, industrial workers won higher wages, which raised the price of manufactured goods. An imbalance emerged because farmers' earnings had fallen. They could afford fewer manufactured goods. Despite the slowing demands, factories kept pouring out goods. This imbalance, combined with other problems, undermined industrial economies. By the late 1920s, conditions were ripe for disaster. Oh, mama, this is a long section. Crash and collapse. Crash and collapse. Few people saw the danger. The United States prices on the New York Stock Exchange soared. Eager investors acquired stocks through margin buying, paying part of the cost and borrowing the rest from brokers. In the autumn of 1929, jitters about the economy caused brokers to call in these loans. Investors who were unable to repay were forced to sell their stocks. Financial panic set in. Stock prices crashed, wiping out the fortune of many investors. The stock market crash triggered the Great Depression of the 1930s, a painful time of global economic collapse. The crash created financial turmoil in the industrial world as American bankers stopped making loans abroad and demanded payment for foreign loans. In the United States and elsewhere, banks failed and businesses closed, throwing millions out of work. The cycle spiraled steadily downward. The jobless could not afford to buy goods, so more factories had to close, which in turn increased the number of unemployed. In once prosperous western cities, people slept on park benches and lined up to eat in charity soup kitchens. Former business leaders sold apples on the street. Global impact. Desperate governments tried to protect their economies from foreign competition. The United States imposed the highest tariffs in history. The policy backfired because other nations retaliated by raising their tariffs. In the end, all countries lost access to the larger global market. As you have read, the Great Depression spread misery from the industrial world to the suppliers of agricultural goods and raw materials. As the Depression dragged on, many people lost faith in the ability of democratic government to solve the problems. Misery and hopelessness created fertile ground for extremists who promised radical solutions. Communists gloated that capitalism had collapsed. Right-wing extremists played on themes of intense nationalism, the failure of democracy and the virtue of authoritarian rule, and the need to rearm. Okay, this is... I hope they have more on the Great Depression. Britain in the post-war era. Even before the Depression, Britain faced economic problems. Although it emerged victorious from the war, much of its overseas trade was lost. German U-boats had wreaked havoc on British shipping. The nation was deeply in debt, and its factories were out of date. During the 1920s, unemployment was severe. Wages remained low, leading to worker unrest and frequent strikes. In 1926, a general strike, or strike by workers in many different industries, at the same time lasted 9 days and involved some 3 million workers. Economics and politics. Let me just Economics and politics. During the 1920s, the Labour Party surpassed the Liberal Party in strength. Labor leaders gained support among workers by promoting a gradual move towards socialism. The middle class, however, firmly backed the Conservative Party, which held power during much of this period. Widespread fear of communism contributed to a drift toward the right. After the general strike, conservatives passed legislation limiting the power of workers to strike. The Great Depression intensified the nation's economic woes. As the crisis worsened, Britain set up a coalition government made up of leaders from all three major political parties. The coalition government provided some unemployment benefits to ease the worst problems. Despite such efforts, millions of people suffered great hardships. Irish independence. At the war's end, Britain still faced the Irish Inquisition. Faced the Irish question. The Irish Inquisition. In 1914, you will recall, Parliament passed the Home Rule Bill that was shelved when the war began. Militant Irish nationalists, however, were unwilling to wait. On Easter 1916, a small group launched a revolt against British rule. Although the Easter Rising was quickly suppressed, the execution of 15 rebel leaders stirred wider support for their cause. When Parliament again failed to grant Home Rule in 1919, revolution erupted in Ireland. Members of the Irish Republic Army, IRA, carried on a guerrilla war against British forces and their supporters. Civilians were often caught in the middle of violence. In 1922, moderates of Ireland and England reached an agreement. Most of Ireland became self-governing Irish Free State. The largely Protestant northern countries, Ulster, remained under British rule. However, the IRA and other opponents of the treaty never accepted the division. Civil war broke out. Although peace was restored in 1923, the status of Northern Ireland would remain a thorny issue through the end of the century. The Troubles. Commonwealth and Empire. In 1931, four former colonies, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, became fully self-governing dominions within their newly formed British Commonwealth of Nations. Although linked by economic and cultural ties, each member of the Commonwealth pursued its own course. Despite challenges from nationalists, Britain retained its colonies. To the British, their vast empire remained a source of wealth and pride. At the same time, Britain worked to improve agriculture and education in its colonies while planning for gradual independence at some uncertain date. Foreign policy. Britain's post-war foreign policy created tension with its ally France. Almost from the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, British leaders wanted to relax the treaty's harsh treatment of Germany. They feared that Germany became too weak. The Soviet Union would be able to expand, and France might gain too much control of the continent. What? They feared that if Germany became too weak, the Soviet Union would be able to expand, and France might gain too much control on the continent. Britain's leniency towards Germany helped push France in the opposite direction. France pursues security. Like Britain, France emerged from World War I with both victor and loser. Fighting on the Western Front had devastated northern France. The French fighting on the Western Front had devastated northern France. The French had suffered enormous casualties. Survivors felt battered and insecure. The French economy recovered fairly rapidly, thanks in part to German reparations and territories gained from Germany, including Alsace and Lorraine. Later, the Great Depression did not hurt France as much as it did some countries. French industry was not as centralized as the hands of big business. Some small workshops served local regions and were less affected by global trends. Coalition governments. Economic swings did occur, adding to an unstable political scene. Political division and financial scandals continued to plague the Third Republic. Many parties, from conservatives to communists, competed for power. During the post-war years, France was again ruled by a series of coalition governments. In 1936, several leftist parties united behind the socialist leader Leon Blum. His Popular Front government tried to solve labor problems and passed some social legislation, but it could not satisfy more radical leftists. Strikes soon brought down Blum's government. Thus, France, like Britain, muddled through a series of crises. Democracy survived, but the country lacked strong leadership that could respond to the clamor for change. The Mignotte Line. France's chief concern after the war was securing its borders against Germany. The French remembered its distrust of the German invasion in 1870 and 1914. To prevent the third invasion, France built massive fortifications along its border. The Mazigueux. What? Why didn't it... They use the word and then they show me the phonetic spelling. Now I read it totally wrong the first time. Whatever. Maginot Line. The Maginot Line, as this defensive wall was called, offered a sense of security, a false one. The line would be of little use when Germany again invaded in 1940. In its quest for security, France strengthened its military and sought alliances with other countries, including the Soviet Union. It insisted on strict enforcement of the Versailles Treaty and complete payment of reparations, hoping to keep the German economy weak. Prosperity and depression in the United States. The United States emerged from World War I in excellent shape. A late entrant into the war, it had suffered relatively few casualties and little loss of property. It led the war in industrial and agricultural output. American money helped finance the European recovery. Post-war issues. As you have read, the United States stayed out of the League of Nations, arguing that membership might lead to involvement in future foreign wars. Many Americans insisted that the nation maintain its free hand in foreign affairs. Still, during the 1920s, the United States took a leading role in international diplomacy. It sponsored the Kellogg-Briand Pact, pressed for disarmament and worked to reduce German reparations. Fear of bomb-throwing radicals in the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia set off the Red Scare in 1919 and 1920. Police rounded up suspects, foreign-born radicals, and a number were expelled from the United States. The Red Scare fed growing demand to limit immigration. Millions of immigrants from the southern and eastern Europe had poured into the United States between 1890 and 1914. Some native-born Americans sought to exclude these newcomers whose cultures differed from those of earlier settlers from northern Europe. In response, Congress passed laws limiting immigration from Europe. Earlier laws had already excluded or limited Chinese and Japanese immigration. I don't know about that. Boom and bust. In the boom years of the 1920s, the middle-class Americans enjoyed the benefits of capitalism. They stocked their homes with radios, refrigerators, and automobiles. Most Americans agreed that President Calvin Coolidge, that The business of America is business. In 1929, stock market crash shattered this mood of prosperity. President Herbert Hoover firmly believed that the government should not intervene in private business matters. However, its hard times got worse. He did try a variety of limited measures to solve the crisis. Nothing seemed to work. The New Deal. In 1932, Americans elected a new president, Franklin D. Delano Roosevelt, or FDR. FDR projected a sense of energy and optimism, arguing that the government had to take an active role in combating the Great Depression. He introduced the New Deal, a massive package of economic and social programs. Under the New Deal, the federal government became more directly involved in people's everyday lives than ever before. New laws regulated the stock market and protected bank depositors' savings. Government programs created jobs for the unemployed and gave aid to farmers. A new social security system provided old age pensions and other benefits that major European countries had introduced years earlier. The New Deal failed to end the Great Depression, but it did ease the suffering for many. Still, some critics fiercely demanded that FDR's expansion of the role of government. As a result of the New Deal, many Americans came to expect the government to intervene directly to promote their economic well-being. The debate about size and role of federal government continues to this day, beyond 2001, the publishing date of this textbook. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. My name is John Michael at the Context is Everything Media Network. God bless. Have a good day. Goodbye.